80.
Thanks, Miles. Thanks for having me.
So you've got a very complicated set of things to discuss. Some of them very highly spiritual and very deep. So the lecture is titled The Heart Singularity. So take us away.
That's right. Yeah, some people may know me from my writing on various different websites over the last maybe 10 years or so. I run my own website, my own social network called eureka.org, which has a kind of secondary name of the Earth Heart Community, which reflects the understandings that I have that essentially the heart is a very significant part of our being, let's say, and we kind of have forgotten that generally as humanity in general, certainly in Europe and so-called civilized societies. So the Earth Heart Community is a system that I've made, a website designed to promote a spiritual kind of return to balance both within ourselves and with the earth. So I'm also on steamit.com. I blog on there quite a lot, and some other places. So it's just a quick introduction to where some people will know me from, but I kind of have had a fairly long and complicated life in a sense. I've fitted a lot in so far into my life, and so I guess I can really just give a brief summary of how I came to be here. So I began programming computers when I was about 4 years old, and my mum was a structural engineer who actually worked on the Sydney Opera House roof. So she was one of the first females in Britain to be working on computers, actually. So I was always surrounded by technology, and I come from a kind of an engineering background, family with engineering backgrounds. And so as I got older, I went into computing and basically did a degree in systems engineering, and so then got to work with various different companies and groups and saw lots of different industries from different angles, which maybe is a little bit unusual in the sense that people will typically only see one or two industries, let's say, in their career, whereas I've seen many different industries, and often from places and positions which maybe a lot of people wouldn't ever get to see. So I've picked up a lot in my life regarding what's really going on behind the scenes of our corporate world, let's say. And so when I combine with that my intentions basically to help the planet, which is a very strong intention in my life, to help us feel good and to succeed as humanity, I have a lot to say basically as a result, because many of the problems that I see today I know can be solved fairly easily, and yet we aren't doing it. So generally speaking, we aren't doing it. So I'm really inspired to try to help people to find solutions to the problems that we face, and that's what keeps me going. So I found Bases originally on YouTube as a result of searching and researching into paranormal topics, and specifically UFO ET topics, because I've had a few ET UFO type experiences of my own, and also various different kind of unusual, let's say, paranormal experiences too. So I was very happy to find Bases and to listen to all the interesting people that have been on here talking about their own experiences and sharing their insights. So I thought it'd be good to add my bit back into it all if I can. So what I'd like to talk about mainly today, since it's a kind of a topic that's very prevalent in the media, and certainly I know Bases watchers are very interested in the whole idea of AI and the roboticization of humanity, and this has been in the news a lot recently with regards to, let's say, Saudi Arabia, where I know they're planning apparently to build a whole city that's basically populated by robots, and they've just given legal status to a robot. So we're kind of moving.
And the robot law. Robot law now. There is a law for robots.
Yes, you mentioned that earlier on to me.
Or more accurately, as humans have to deal with robots, they must not disobey the robot law.
I find that slightly disturbing, but without actually doing any research into it, I won't comment. But what I can comment on is what I have seen, definitely with my own eyes. And for example, that was the An important thing to bring up is the recent conference in Saudi Arabia where they had a robot on stage named Sophia, that they named Sophia, obviously bearing in mind that Sophia is a classical name for feminine wisdom, feminine goddess personality. And they basically stuck an emotionless robot on the stage called her Sophia and tried to hold her up as almost being the, well, it's not her, is it, but tried to hold it up as being the future of humanity in a way. And they literally gave this robot human legal status, bearing in mind that Saudi Arabia is not exactly the world's leading nation for women's rights and other kinds of issues relating to human rights. So I did find it very very revealing that you had a room there full of basically men, wealthy men predominantly, sitting and staring at an imaginary woman, kind of all clapping and saying, wow, this is amazing, this is such an achievement. And really, to me, it just felt a lot like they were essentially kind of patting themselves on the back for being able to find a woman that has no emotions and can't talk back to them. It's pretty much what I got from it. I'm sure there will be some people who think that's a bit unfair, but... Yeah,
but they can talk back, and she talks back really well, as Piers Morgan found out.
Well, talk back in up to a point, but you can turn her off and you can reprogram her, and I think even the creators or whoever it was, the narrator there at the conference was saying, yeah, this isn't really true AI, it's partially scripted. And as a systems kind of specialist, I could really detect that before I even said that, because it's quite obvious that the conversation they were having was pre-scripted in significant places. Yeah, so I don't really want to point too much into the people creating that robot or who they are. I don't know really anything about them, but I'm just trying to draw in the topics and themes that I'd like to talk about, which really are the contrast between the AI robotic version of reality and the actual soulful, human, heart-centered version of reality, which is something that is greatly lacking and missing on our planet, especially in the so-called civilized parts of the planet. You will ironically find, I would say, arguably more advanced cultures living in jungles than you will typically in European American cities, but simply because they're more heart-centered, and it means that although they might not have advanced technologies and these kinds of things, they actually are able to communicate and behave respectfully with each other, often in a way that's heart-centered. Not all of them, obviously, but that's something that the Western societies, as we call them, are only now really starting to learn about. So I'm grateful to all the people who have taught me about this subject over the last 15-20 years. And I've learned a lot, so it's definitely something that I'd like to promote more. And I think in terms of the big kind of keyword when people talk about AI and robotics seems to be singularity. At least from my perspective, that's the most kind of media buzzword type of term that gets thrown around. And I just really wanted to reflect on what that is and what the alternative actually is, because I'm pretty sure I know what it is. So you've got people like Ray Kurzweil, who used to be, I'm not sure if he still is, but at one time was the lead technologist for Google, basically saying openly that the singularity is coming, and that singularity is a state where technology enters into a self-propelling, self-accelerating phase where it's able to improve itself over and over and over and over again without human interaction, and eventually becomes so advanced quite quickly actually that the technology surpasses human intelligence, meaning that in their own kind of worldview humans become obsolete, or at least most humans become obsolete, and they presumably, as the creators of the technology, get to load themselves into cyborg bodies and become kind of masters of the universe. And that's not too far off from pretty much what I was hearing from them, I think. So I'm sure a lot of people would kind of find that a bit disturbing or funny or just not very likely, but we're talking about some of the people with some of the most money on the planet, and I mean literally an almost unending amount of money coming into their business. So it's something really that should be looked at. And I know Google did buy many of the most advanced robotics companies not so long ago, and for example Boston Dynamics I think is one, and they're the companies making robot bodies that literally can surpass human bodies and do somersaults and everything animals can do and so on. So it's not a joke, and it's not something to ignore. And really what I wanted to just point out is that when I was about 22, something like that, it's quite a while ago, I went through a period of what people would call spiritual awakening, and really it was just me realizing a lot of things really quickly, and from reading certain books just prompted me to put two and two together, and I found a lot of puzzle pieces very quickly. And this, bearing in mind, this was before the internet really was a big thing. It was just kind of just as that was about to explode, so I didn't really have much to go on. I just had a few books here and there that I found. I didn't really have anyone to talk about it, but I realized very quickly that everything is one, which is a kind of classic spiritual understanding. It's the truth. Everything that exists is ultimately a oneness. It's one. And so the universe, the sun, you, me, everything, although we're all individual, we all have our own shapes and forms. Basically, we are part of a singular oneness. So if you consider that to be truth, then we have to ask the question, why do we not already have all the answers to everything? Or at least why do we not have a way to share understandings almost telepathically, automatically, if we're that connected? What's the barrier to that? And the more I started asking those questions and thinking about it, the more I found actually we are telepathically connected, and we can do these things, and that's basically psychic ability. And there's a reason why lots of people don't think that that's real, and there's a reason why quite a lot of people actually know it's real, and they do it on a daily basis. So that to me is one of the most fascinating subjects really to address. And I think if more people understood that we have these latent innate abilities that have been lost, less people would be more interested in becoming a robot, in short. So I think it's important that we sort of explore these subjects. And the quickest way to explain why, from my perspective, we generally don't understand these topics at all, and we've lost touch with our kind of, let's say, superhuman abilities, is because our real power comes from our heart, and our heart is injured heavily. Most people's heart is injured, it's disconnected, and they're very stuck in the brain, and they're not using the heart in the way it's meant to be used, which is as a balancing organ for the human system. So without the heart, what they're left with is just mentality and thinking, and that's the origin of large parts of our society, is very dry, kind of masculine oriented thoughts with a rejection of feminine emotion, and certainly very little involvement of the heart. So I know that after 15 years of talking to people about this subject, that there are some people who will completely reject everything I'm saying, and they'll say, no, the heart's a pump for blood, and that's it. You're an idiot. And I've talked to lots of those people, and I know from experience as well that when I explain to them the mechanics of the heart and how it's the bonding place for thought and emotion together, it's where masculine and feminine balance is in the human system. Generally, they don't have much to say to that, because they're not able to answer it, because they don't have the experience of going into the heart. And I think if there was one thing that humanity needs to learn more than anything else, it's how to come into our own heart. And I don't think it's an accident that the word Earth is an anagram of heart. Again, which is why I named my website the Earth Heart Community. To me, they're all interlinked, interconnected, and the more you're in your heart, the more likely you are to be connected to the earth and to other people, and you're more able to actually understand what's going on, as opposed to trying to guess and assume and make calculations and all these kind of things that we get stuck doing because we don't really know what's going on fully, and we don't feel comfortable with not knowing. So instead of just accepting we don't know, we just invent something, and that to me is one of the biggest problems we're facing. So that's kind of what I see the whole robotics, cybernetics thing doing, in a sense, is they don't really know the answers to all the problems. They don't really know their origins in the universe. They don't really know their place in the universe. But they're going to have a go at fixing all the problems without knowing really what they're trying to fix. And the best solution they've come up with is to replace themselves with robots. So yeah, that's definitely something which obviously concerns a lot of people. And I think I'll just say on that now that artificial intelligence is called artificial for a reason. It's because it's artificial. And proponents of it might say, well, it's artificial because it's not human. But really, you can't have real intelligence without emotions being involved. And as far as I'm aware, computers don't have emotions. So therefore, I would posit that artificial intelligence is only ever going to really be very limited in what it can do. So why are we bothering with it? Basically, I would suggest it's much more beneficial and productive for us to focus on our own consciousness and to move inside of us, as yoga has taught for thousands of years probably, and many teachers have taught. Really, we need to go inside of ourselves to know ourselves and to understand who we are, and from that we can balance, heal and evolve, which is really what my mission is right now, is to help people balance, heal and evolve. There's so many different directions I can go with this, really, in terms of, I mean, one point to make is it's a bit of a paradox that I have dedicated so much of my time to working with technology, and on the other hand I'm here telling everyone, well, why are we using technology, we should stop. I think my explanation for that really is that because so many people are addicted to their screens all day long, how am I going to reach them? How is anyone going to reach them unless it's through the screen? So I don't have a problem with using technology as it is to reach people, if it helps nudge them back to who they really are and to their heart, and helps us become more real and more human in the process. So that's why I'm using social networking right now. At some point I'll probably stop, but that's where I'm up to with that. And that also brings me on really to Steemit and blockchains and cryptocurrency, which is another hot topic at the moment. So it's something that a lot of people don't really understand very well, and I've actually put the last year of my life into learning it quite closely, and I've used, probably most people don't even know what Steemit is. Steemit's a website, steemit.com, steemit.com, and it's a social network a bit like Facebook and so on, but it has a cryptocurrency behind it, which is a financial system, basically a money system, a bit like Bitcoin, and it's public, it's transparent, it's not run by a central authority, and everyone that posts on this website gets paid money as a result of posting, or they can do if they get outvoted. And that's paid from inflation that's generated every day. New coins are made, and the net result of all of this is that after, I don't know, maybe 18 months of it being live, there's people on there now who are literally earning $1 to $2 to $3 million a year pay rate just from blogging. So that basically means YouTube, Facebook, all the other social networks, their days are heavily numbered, because if you can do the same thing you're doing on those sites and not getting paid anything from those sites really, or very little, and you're being censored by them as well, if you can do those things on Steemit where you can't be censored because it's a public blockchain and you're getting paid a lot of money for doing it, why would you use Facebook or Google or YouTube? You would only use them because people are still using them who don't really know about these alternatives. So that's another important message about to people. If there's anything, if you're not interested in the heart and spirituality and these things, that's fine, but if you are a web user, at least go and check out Steemit, because it's probably going to change your life. It could do if you persist with it. So yeah, I mean, coming back to my life in terms of technology as well, at one point around the time of 9/11, I was making banking software in central London, and I actually watched the 9/11 events happen on my screen live, and I kind of thought, I didn't really know what was going on, but I realized it was like a kind of allegedly terrorist event, and I knew this was a financial center, and I knew I was in a financial center, and basically I thought, well, maybe I'm a target, and that really woke me up, and it really made me research 9/11 in great detail, and brought me to many of the topics that brings a lot of people together, who want to help the world, when we collectively realize that basically the banking system, people who run the banking system generally, the governments, a significant proportion of them are basically completely corrupt and heartless, and arguably, provably involved in massive, serious crimes. So it falls on us as individuals, in my opinion, to create solutions and systems which can replace those corrupt, controlling, enslaving systems. And I see cryptocurrency and blockchains as being one aspect to that, definitely, because it essentially means we don't have to rely on the Federal Reserve and all these other central banking hierarchies in order for us to trade using tokens. And that's the bottom, that's the kind of the crux of it all, is that as long as you've got a middleman in between you and the source of your power, or whatever you think is the source of your power, then you've got less power, because that middleman's taking some of your power. So why are we doing it? Let's just take the power back, basically, like Rage Against the Machine said. Yeah, so I can talk for an almost unlimited amount of time on these subjects, but I'm just trying to get through quite a long list of subjects in a relatively short space of time. And
well, you mentioned about computers, but they do have a consciousness. They do access our consciousness. They are conscious entities.
It's interesting, yeah. I mean, from the understanding that everything is one, that basically means that everything is a form of either consciousness or unconsciousness. And unconsciousness, in essence, could be said to be consciousness in waiting. So it's a very interesting perspective to think about if you consider that everything could be potentially conscious. You know, in a sense, it means everything that's alive, plants and maybe even things we think aren't alive, could at some point evolve and develop something akin to what we would recognize as consciousness. That said, the most important thing is, for me, does the entity that we're talking about have a heart? If it has a heart, then it has feelings, it has emotions, and it has it has the capacity for full consciousness. Since computers don't have hearts, they're sadly lacking, basically, and I think the best they can do is mimic 50% of the intelligence that's how I would summarize that. Maybe one day that will change, but personally I think that we're better off evolving ourselves, since we don't need the middleman of the computer to come between us and our capacity for thinking and creativity.
I mean, what about the 2045 agenda? You mentioned us becoming cyborgs. That's the 2045 agenda, wants us to be in those computers.
Yeah.
As avatars.
I think whether that's possible or not is debatable. You may end up having some elements of the consciousness of a being inserted into a system, but without the actual electromagnetic essence of the being that you can call a soul being involved, then really it's just a copy. Is it possible to take the electromagnetic soul essence of a being and somehow systematize it and put it into a computer? Maybe, I don't know, but I would like to think that humanity was smart enough to direct itself towards more, let's say, safe and reliable options for evolution than doing that. And I think what it really comes down to is, even if there are some people who want to take humanity in that direction, we all have free will, and that's really the key, is our free will. And if you look at the most corrupting forces on the planet and the most evil forces on the planet, they're always trying to override free will. They're always trying to find ways to get us to give up our free will. And it's gotten to the point where I regularly talk to people who actually deny that free will even exists. They're convinced that it doesn't exist. And I say to them, well, will is you doing something. If you breathe or you move your arm into a position, anything, that's an action of your will, so it must exist. And then they'll come up and say, well, all these different explanations, mental gymnastics to say why that isn't true. But from my perspective, I choose to do something, I will it, and therefore I have will, and that's that. And my will can be controlled, which means it's not free will anymore, it's just will, or I can allow my will to be completely free, and then I'm going to be basically quite empowered and able to be more of who I really want to be. And if you look at the political, governmental, even scientific, judicial, education systems, nearly all of them really are heavily skewed towards suppressing will of other people, and the will is very much connected into emotionality and the feminine side of our essence. So that's why, in a sense, it's alarming when you see, or when I see, scientists attempting to remove all emotion from their work, or also in the court system, as if that's going to somehow result in a more truthful outcome. But if a significant amount of the information you need is coming from your emotions, then you're going to automatically be hindering yourself in your ability to know what's true. And that's literally what I see happening. So it is true that your emotions can mislead you and maybe draw you off into an avenue of thinking which isn't helpful, but that's where the heart comes in, which is to say that the heart balances the thoughts and the emotions together so that you can actually gain the insight from emotion from the feminine side and the useful thought processes from the masculine side and bring them together in a balanced, coherent way. So yeah, there's no way to mimic that through technology, and I think as long as those who choose to survive, basically, is how I would put it. Those who choose to have free will, and to be the strongest and best version of themselves as a human and beyond, as long as they choose to maintain their respect and increase their respect for their emotions and their own heart, they're going to be okay, pretty much. Those who become cyborgs, probably not so much. That's my prediction. I don't like making predictions, but I would say in this case, that's, to me, it's fairly clear. But so yeah, I mean, I could talk about technology for a long, long time, but that's, to me, that's one part of my life, and other parts of my life to me are more interesting, really. So I mentioned Rage Against the Machine, bringing music back into the subject. So I've always made music for a long time, and I've been to quite a lot of music festivals, met a lot of interesting people, and what I've come to understand, as other people probably on the Bases series have pointed out as well, is that music is very powerful and connected very much to what we might call paranormal experiences, because everything is vibrating all the time. All the atoms are vibrating. We are vibrational beings, so anything which is a form of vibration is obviously capable of affecting quite a lot in reality, and we know that from the fact that music's such a big money-making thing and so many people love music. It just so happens that, as it turns out, music festivals, I've learned, apparently are of great interest to, let's say, some of the more interesting beings around our planet, some of whom probably aren't human. And this comes back to why I came into contact with Bases in the first place, because I've had in my life a couple of contacts with light ships, what I call light ships, which to me are like plasma vehicles, they appear to be very, very bright light in the sky, and they'll have a form which could be a geometric shape or some other kind of form. And having seen them now twice quite close up, they are basically glowing, very intense light, which I would say is a form of almost matter that's not quite matter, so a form of energy that's pre-matter, let's say. And the reason I bring up the music festivals is that the last time I saw one was actually at the Reading Festival in England in 2007, and at that time I thought that it was so obvious and it was so visible, and there were thousands of people around me in the crowd. I thought, wow, this is it. This is the day that the world realizes that we have these visitors here, because it's going to be on all these cameras, and there's no way to hide it. And basically I'd been kind of forewarned by someone online that this was a good time. This weekend was going to be an interesting time, let's say, for these kinds of experiences. So I was actually looking up while I was in the crowd, and it was the last day of that weekend, and it was Smashing Pumpkins, the band, were playing, who I really liked. And I was quite near the front of the crowd, and there was 60,000 people. It was a pitch black night with a bright moon, and I was looking up every now and again, and I just happened to see this orange light in the sky, and I was like, wow, okay, what's that? And it got closer and closer and closer, and basically it flew over me and the crowd, and it was about, I'd say, it's hard to say, maybe 100 to 200 meters off the ground. And I was screaming and screaming to everyone to get them to look at it, but the music was so loud and the lights were so bright that no one looked. And the only person I saw that looked was my friend, who I pointed, grabbed him and pointed him to it. And I looked at his eyes to make sure he was actually looking at it, and his eyes just glazed over as soon as he looked at it. He went into kind of shock. And that
Do you have a picture or something like that?
Yeah, so I can bring it up on the slide here. So this is an interesting story. So this picture was taken by a guy from Mexico called Carlos Diaz. And I didn't know about him when I saw this ship. I found out about this documentary that covered his story a few years later. Didn't really tell many people about my experiences with it because I had no proof for it, and I don't really like trying to convince people of things that I can't show any evidence for. So Carlos Diaz was as I recall, he was a reporter, I think, in Mexico, out in the countryside, and he was driving late at night on a quiet road on his own, and he stopped for some reason, and he saw this ship in a valley ahead of him, and he had his camera with him, and he took some pictures of it, and it ascended out of the valley and kind of flew away. And so he was obviously amazed and shocked, and as he gradually processed and integrated those experiences, he came to have more and more of them, and it got to the point, it's quite a long story, but it got to the point where he actually was taken on board the ship consciously. He would get up at like 2 or 3 in the morning while his wife was asleep and consciously go with them. And he explained that basically the Mayan people, because I think he's probably part of the Mayan culture or related to it or close, you know, he's from that part of the world. And at one point I remember he explained that he was taken to a kind of secret underground cavern, I guess you would call it, which the certain members of those tribes have known about for a very long time. And they taught him things. Basically they put him through certain processes and, for example, put him in some sort of energetic sphere or egg-shaped thing which allowed him to experience what it was like to be an eagle, for example, and he literally was an eagle for that while he was in there. So it was very spiritual kind of experiences he was having, but he's a very peaceful, kind of quiet guy. But when I saw this picture on the internet, I was just so happy. I was kind of like, wow, that's, I almost couldn't believe or accept that I was seeing it, because it validated my previous experiences. And when I got back from that festival in Reading, I did look up on the internet at that time, in the early sort of days of the internet, to see if anyone else had reported seeing it. And one guy or some person had actually reported seeing the same thing I'd seen, but it was 100 miles away from the Reading Festival. And that was all I heard about it. But as soon as I saw this picture, I knew it was the same vehicle, almost exactly the same colours, and the colours change and they move. So obviously that's the static picture we're seeing there. But it's very much alive looking. The light literally looks alive. And there's a certain magnetic nature to it as well. There were actually, when I saw it, there were, I think I counted 13 small white kind of orb type craft around it, very, very bright as well. And at the time, bearing in mind it was nighttime and I was outside, I thought maybe these were birds and there was a spotlight hitting them, they were that bright. But I thought, well, there aren't any spotlights pointing upwards, so I just kept watching them, and basically they were connected to this other vehicle in some way, and they were moving a bit like a school of fish, so they were kind of magnetically repulsing and attracting each other. And what I saw that night, essentially, those vehicles gradually just moved off over the horizon, and that was the end of the experience. But for Carlos Diaz, he had many experiences with them, and it got to the point where he actually invited, or somehow a Mexican university team was sent down, as I recall. It's been a while since I watched the documentaries, but you can watch them on YouTube. We'll put a link in the notes, I guess, or I'll write a comment linking to them. And the university team essentially came down, and they really, I think they didn't expect to have an interaction with an ET or UFO craft or whatever you want to call it. I think they thought it was a hoax, and basically it manifested sort of out of nothing, just like that. It just appeared, and apparently most of the team just ran off terrified, because they weren't really prepared for that. And a lot of the pictures which Carlos has made were sent apparently to, you can see in the documentary, were sent to a NASA photo analyst, also to various Hollywood specialists at the time, using kind of dated equipment now, but back then, they were the top in their fields, and they analysed these pictures, and every single one of them said these are not fake pictures. Whatever we're seeing there is a real thing that was taken with this camera. So to my knowledge, that's the only time I've ever heard of NASA specialists openly saying, this is definitely a blatantly obvious UFO craft. And I'm just amazed that, not so many people have heard about his case, really. It's to me, it's the most amazing. I mean, it's amazing to me because I've seen the same thing, but to me, it's the most amazing because it's so detailed and so there's a lot of evidence for it, and real specialists have agreed that there's something there as well. So definitely, if you're into these sort of subjects, go and check out the documentary called Ships of Light, which you can find on YouTube. That actually wasn't the first encounter I'd had with a light ship. I used to make music before I had some injuries to my hearing, and there was a time where I was working with someone who's now quite well known in some circles, making music, and we were travelling back from where we were staying back towards London. We were driving down the A11. I was driving. It was about 11:30, I think, if I remember correctly, at night. Dark again, and I'd been having unusual experiences for the previous few days, very unusual, to the point where I wasn't even sure if I was sane or going crazy or what was happening. Basically, it was around the time when I had these spiritual awakening experiences and I started to realize everything's one, and essentially I was so energetic and excited about those understandings that my consciousness expanded, and I was telepathing with beings who are not here. And it's not something I'd ever thought about in my whole life, and didn't know if it was real or not, and I wasn't ready for it. And basically I wasn't sure whether I was going crazy or if there's something to it, or even if I was being messed with by technology in some way. But there's nothing I could do but keep going through the experience, and gradually more and more kind of strange things kept happening. Synchronicities, as I'd call them now, kind of manifestations, let's say, in physical reality that didn't really have a great explanation, except for they were paranormal experiences. And I'm not talking about ectoplasm or anything like that, but just signs and things would occur which made me, it was like a prompt to say, yeah, what you're thinking about actually is correct. I'll put it like that. It would take me a long time to explain all this in detail, but the short version is I came to understand that I was communicating with ETs, but thought that was a bit of a crazy idea, but I have a very open mind. Basically, I always like to keep my mind open because I know that that's the only way I'm going to get to the truth. And I might find I was right, I might find I was wrong, but anyway, we were driving back down the A11, quite close to the Bentwaters kind of area, about 20 miles away, I think. Is it RAF Woodbridge? Is that the name of it?
Yeah, there's two bases, Woodbridge and Bentwaters. Yeah,
so we were not too far away from there, and I was driving and I got a shot of energy. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before or since. I got a shock of energy up my spine, and it turned my head to the left. So something energetically caused my head to turn to the left and up as I was driving. And as soon as my head stopped, I was looking at another plasma ship. It was a triangle shape, bright red, about as bright red as you can imagine, with a orangey underside that was slightly wavy. And it was about the size of a house, and it was about 100 meters away, and it was above the tree line. And I just started laughing, basically, because I was so stressed from all of these weird experiences I'd been having. And to actually see this thing there, it was like, oh my God, thank you. I'm not going crazy. I might be hallucinating this thing, but at least, at least I've got something that I can explore now that isn't just my thoughts. And so I quickly turned to my friend, who was in the passenger seat, and I just started laughing. I said, what do you think that is? And he looked at it, and again I was watching his eyes to make sure he was actually focusing on it, and he just became terrified. As soon as he saw it, he just said, drive, shouted, drive. And then I just I just started laughing again, because I was just so happy that he could see it, and that this wasn't just a delusion I was having, and that he was seeing it and it was a real thing. So if I was on my own, I probably would have stopped the car and gone and investigated, but at that time that road was a single carriageway, difficult to stop, and he really was frightened and wanted me to drive, so I just kept driving. So I've had a few experiences like that, and the most interesting thing for me is that the causality, let's say, of those experiences was not just a random chance. It wasn't just me happening to look up and seeing them. It was me having experiences on the ground that led up to that, which prepared me for that. And what I learned from Reading Festival basically was that you can have 60,000 people in the vicinity of something like this, and most of them aren't going to see it. All right, they were heavily distracted, but the point is, I come to understand really now that if you aren't ready for something of that nature, you are going to block it out, or you're just going to turn the other way. Something's going to cause you not to recognize that it's there. And although I've never seen ghosts or anything like that, I can relate now more to people who say they've seen them, even while other people don't see them, because it seems like we have the ability to heavily filter what we perceive in our reality. And I think some people would say, oh, you hallucinated it, you invented it, it's not there because I can't see it. But I think in a certain number of cases it's just as likely to be the other way around, where there are really these kinds of things which a lot of people aren't saying because they're filtering them out, because their belief systems say that's impossible. So therefore their kind of part of their brain that processes data says that thing I'm sensing can't be real because it doesn't fit in with what I accept is real, so therefore it erases it. And there's a very interesting book called The Holographic Universe by Michael Tolbert, which talks about subjects like this, and there's some diagrams in there which show you that your brain is actually doing that. So you can do a little experiment with your eyes, and you can actually see that your brain is effectively censoring information in an interesting way. So definitely check that book out as well, The Holographic Universe, if you haven't already read it. So all these things together have really taught me a lot about humanity and psychology and reality, and answered some of my questions about the whole paranormal and UFO kind of agenda or topic, because there's so much contradicting information and so many different voices with different beliefs and lots of arguments. And I think if you understand that everyone has a subjective reality and they have the capacity to filter things out or add things in and totally and utterly accept that that's real, that does explain quite a lot of why people disagree about certain subjects, not just in the ET world or a UFO kind of studying realm, but just in life in general as well. So I think there would be a lot less arguments if we all remembered that we all have our own reality, basically, and it's real for us. So that, you know, that definitely can increase the peace if we all focused on that a little bit more and kept that in mind, instead of, you know, this whole I'm right, you're wrong kind of paradigm. So yeah, I mean, in terms of continuing on the topic of ETs and UFOs, since that's so relevant to bases, after those experiences I had a lot of questions, understandably, and so I really started looking onto the internet, reading books, looking at everything I could find. And one day somebody pointed me to a character called Bashar on YouTube, and effectively it's spirit channeling, and I didn't know what spirit channeling was. I'd never heard of it, and I think I'd probably heard of it, but I'd never seen it, and I didn't really think it was real. I thought it was a hoax, you know, just a way to make money out of people. But I watched some videos on YouTube of Bashar, which is actually channeled allegedly by Daryl Anker. There's actually 10 or so channels of Bashar, but the one that's best known is Daryl Anker, who, if I remember rightly, is the cousin of Paul Anker, I think, the famous singer. I think that's the right name, maybe not, but he used to work as a producer on Star Trek, and so he's been around Hollywood. And his story is basically he had a couple of close encounters with UFOs that led him to study paranormal subjects, and he got into channeling and became very good at it, and then started being able to channel this consciousness which calls itself Bashar, which is, according to them, a race of beings which are a hybrid between humanity genetics, human genetics from now roughly, and grey ET, let's say, genetics. I don't know if that's true, but he's got a very in-depth explanation as to who they are and why they're contacting us. And the short version of this is I've listened to probably about 500 hours of that material now. I haven't listened to it for a while, but I did in the past listen to a large amount of that because I found it fascinating. And they're able to explain questions and communicate in a way that I've really never seen a human even come close to. So that alone made me want to listen to them. But I mean, yeah, anybody who's interested in these subjects, definitely go and look up Bashar, because you'll get busy for a long time. Some people might think it's I don't know, I've heard people say that he's basically channeling a satellite, and, you know, he's really just a part of a mind control agenda. It's up for you and your subjective reality to find whether or not the information they're putting out is useful or not. 50% of it I like, 50% of it I'm a bit uncomfortable with. But what I will say though is it's very interesting the way that they're able to explain, let's say, physics theories, or not even theories, they explain physics in a way that is completely rounded and complete. So they won't just give you a theory, oh, we think this is how it is. You know, they'll say, no, it's like this. This is exactly how physics works because we use it in our ships, we do this with it. And basically, until their perspective is belief systems shape reality. So if you have a belief that something is true or not true, you're going to alter physical reality as a result of that, and you may not realize you've done it. And the example that I give to kind of demonstrate that is, for example, let's say you have the belief that says you can't play the piano. When you come to the piano, now part of your energetic system is wired up, let's say, to pre-load your reality so that you have difficulty playing the piano, because your energy is basically vibrating, saying I can't play the piano. And so it's a blockage, basically, in terms of healing and energetic clearing. Let's say that would be classed as a kind of a blockage, just that belief, I can't play the piano. Whereas if you don't have that belief, you're going to have what people might call beginner's luck, or just natural talent, they're going to say. But really all it is, you never told yourself you couldn't do it. And you're just, you're good friends with yourself. You're not kind of putting yourself down. You're just going to allow yourself to express, and probably going to be okay at it. And that's a very simple example of a way that a belief can directly influence what happens in life, or what's created in life. But they're saying it goes all the way through everything. So every belief has the capacity to change what you experience and what you draw into your reality. And it's fascinating. And I think basically the only way to really know whether it's true or not is to explore it for yourself. And that, amusingly or paradoxically, means you actually have to experiment with accepting that what they're saying is true. So, if you hold the belief that says that changing your beliefs won't change your reality, then it's like you're making it impossible for you to find out whether it's true that changing your beliefs will change your reality. It's a bit of a head twister, but ultimately I have explored that, and I have to say I find that there's quite a bit of truth to it. And I actually prefer now to remove all beliefs, because I feel that beliefs, basically, if I define what a belief is to myself, I say, well, it's a thought that says that another thought is true without you knowing whether it's true or not. So, in other words, you're guessing, really, and that's what a belief is. So why are we basing anything on beliefs? So I try to get rid of beliefs and just stick with knowledge and thoughts and feelings, and that's fine for me. But it's so easy to make a belief that it takes a bit of work to clear them out. And for me, that's one of the biggest parts of healing, and that's something that I'm fairly sure humanity really needs to learn and focus on more clearly, because every incorrect thought that we hold not only has the capacity for us to make poor choices, but it actually also can cause physical illness as well. Directly, it causes stress and discomfort and lots of problems. So I would really be happy if schools were to shift, let's say, to having meditation, certainly instead of detentions or punishments, but having meditation actual classes. And I think they would find that their results skyrocketed as a result of that. It's debatable whether the schooling system wants high abilities from their students, but some hopefully do. So this is the direction that I like to take things in general when I look for solutions, is to start with the heart, start inside of us. And interestingly, when you do that, you realize that a lot of the ancient kind of lineages and traditions, such as yoga, and I think some that predate that, really they were trying to focus on these same subjects. And that really also brings me on to the next subject I want to briefly touch on, which takes us back to the whole subject that I was bringing up earlier on about the singularity, which is that you've got basically, you're either heartless to some extent, same for everyone, or you're fully heart-centered, or you're somewhere in between, and most people are somewhere in between. And on one end you've got basically psychopaths, serial killers, really kind of damaged, heartless people. On the other end you've got maybe people who are classed as, in the past, they might have been called saints or whatever it was, very kind of outstanding people who are very loving, compassionate. Most people are somewhere in between. The thing is, we're always creating, all day long we're creating. Just as I'm talking, I'm creating a new reality, I'm creating words, I'm creating a conversation. So if you're heart-centered, you're going to be creating in a heart-balanced way. If you're heartless, you're going to be creating heartless things. And you can see that all around us on planet Earth. You can see almost every kind of creation has a heart-centered kind of version of it, and a heartless version. There's a true, powerful version, and there's a kind of fake version. And many people have pointed out the pharmaceutical industry versus natural healing, or common law versus, or sort of older law systems versus the statute system we have in Britain, that basically is just a pyramid system of control. And it goes through every single establishment where you've got the kind of real and the fake version. But one image that's been in my mind recently quite a lot is the way that Las Vegas, for example, is a really good example. They've taken the pyramids, and they've taken lots of ancient structures from around the world, and they've shoved them into a space in the desert, interestingly not too far away from Area 51. And they have basically tried to sell the world on this idea that with bright flashing lights, that this is the light you need. You know, it's kind of like, come to our bright flashing lights and our great mysteries of the world, and this is the best you can get on planet Earth and have a good time. What they've really done is taken an energetic grid system, taken symbols and structures built from that, from really ancient, deep understandings of sacred geometry and spiritual science, and they've corrupted it totally into a system which basically defrauds people of their money, and just exploits people in so many different ways. And people really have become like moths flying to those lights out in the desert, because they don't have any light of them in their lives normally. All the light's been sucked out of life. All they're left with is TV and smartphones and you know, neon signs basically, and that's the light. Maybe a bit of sunlight if they're lucky. So it's understandable that for them Las Vegas seems like the best thing since sliced bread, kind of thing. It's going to suck them in. And what I'd like people to do is just take a zoom out, take a step back from that, look at that reality, look at Las Vegas, and then look at the real ancient monuments and ancient structures that they're copying, and do some research into those. Because when you do, and you have a really open mind, and you just keep listening to everyone that's talking about these subjects, eventually you're going to find some astonishing information, as I have done, and I'm happy to share it, which completely changes your understanding of the history of the planet and who you are. I mean, this is actually how I got started. How I came to have contact with these light ships was from studying these subjects. So if anybody out there wants to meet some visitors, let's say, then a really good place to start is studying sacred geometry, which is forms of geometry and maths which were classed as being sacred because of their presence in the human body and in nature, and the way that they those forms of mathematics create shapes which then go on to basically create pretty much all the structures in the whole universe. And these forms of sacred mathematics were known by ancient people on this planet, and there's no question, because they've used these maths in so many different structures, including hundreds and thousands of different places in the pyramids in Cairo. And yet we're not taught about them in schools at all. You might hear something mentioned about the Fibonacci sequence, which is related to all of this, related to the phi constant, which is the golden ratio, which was used by Leonardo da Vinci and lots of other kind of masters of the arts. But it's removed completely from our kind of mainstream academic systems, and I would say that that's not an accident at all. I would say that's done deliberately, because if you understand the implications of these systems, these mathematical truths, then you understand something about the ancient past of our planet, and you realize that we didn't kind of come, strictly speaking, just from cavemen and became evolved to where we are now, as scientists and academics try to tell us. Basically, at certain points in the past, humanity had very, very deep, advanced understandings of the universe. And in my opinion, we kind of, it's a bit like a ski jump. We kind of, I don't know where we were at in the dim and distant past, but at some point we got quite high in terms of our understanding, and then cataclysms happened, problems, bad decisions, and our general consciousness level shot right down, and it's like a ski jump. And now we're kind of starting to come back up again. Now we've kind of solved some of the problems at least, and we've got a whole bunch of other problems, but we're learning some of these sacred truths, and they're putting us back on the right path. Some people are. So plus we also have all the technology as well, which could be good or not, but so I think Las Vegas, amusingly, is a really good topic to focus on, and just compare that to what you can learn from the ancient monuments of the planet. Watch a documentary called The Code by Carl Monk on YouTube, which I have a version of on my channel, which has got cleaned up audio now, and it's he was basically a American general, I think he was, military general or colonel. And when he retired, he put a lot of time into studying maps, and he was trying to work out a new form of coordinates, a new way of creating coordinates and mapping in general. And just through chance, or however he did it, he figured out a way of encoding a number which would give you the longitude and latitude on the planet in a particular way. And when he looked at some of the old structures like pyramids and places like that, he found that this code applied to those structures. And the more he analysed the structures, the more he realised that they designed the structures to reflect things that he was discovering based on the position and these other factors that these other kind of ways of working with maths that he was playing around with. And he eventually found out that they were using radians. This is a whole system of mathematics which we don't use nowadays. And my knowledge of it is quite limited, but if you watch that video, it's quite long, but your mind will be blown. Basically, he shows how most, if not all, of the ancient giant structures on the planet were created by people using the same system of math. So they were either the same people or they were all in direct communication with each other. And they were very smart, basically. And he even goes on to show how on Mars, there was the whole Cydonia argument where people were saying, oh, there's a face on Mars you can see from the NASA images. And other people are saying, no, there's no face on Mars, that's silly, it's just shadows. And someone brought out a picture which basically overlaid the Sirius star system, if I remember correctly, the Seven Sisters, I think they're called. And if you take the layout of the brightest stars in that system and you put it on like a transparent piece of plastic and you overlay it on top of the pyramids on Mars, the alleged pyramids on Mars and the face on Mars, they actually match up perfectly. So in other words, and he also showed that the mathematics system he identified for the pyramids on Earth also applied to those ones on Mars as well. So from that perspective, it's hard to really refute that those are actually pyramids on Mars from my perspective without going there. But all of these things, they're all interconnected, and it's really such an important topic for people to explore, I think, because it means you can bypass, just through using maths basically, you can bypass a lot of the propaganda and the let's say lies basically that are being spread about these subjects from people who want to keep us in the dark. So you know, I'm also open to being told that I'm wrong and that Karl Marx maths are wrong or whatever. If you want to do that, go for it. I'm always open to being told I'm wrong because it means I'm getting closer to the truth if I really am wrong. So but this really brings me on to the last kind of topic I want to raise with regards to all these kind of UFO ancient culture subjects, I think. And it was really this subject that really awoke me the most prior to my first encounter with a light ship. And it's a book by an author who I'm actually having trouble remembering his name, but he's almost unheard of. But he wrote a book called The Star Mirror. And I kind of found it by synchronicity during this period, and it has a foreword by Robert Bouval, who's quite well known, and I actually spoke to him on Facebook about this book because I wanted to know why more people didn't know about it, and he basically just ignored me. You know, if I remember correctly, he certainly didn't give me, you know, a helpful answer. But in short, this book appears to show that there are certain constellations above our planet which have, or let's say certain shapes of stars which are triangles, where all the sides of the triangles are the same length. So it's like a perfect triangle. And where those stars align, if you rotate the Earth, I think I'm right in saying, it was a long time since I read the book, but if you rotate the Earth back in time so that everything's aligned as it was thousands of years ago at the time the pyramid was created in Cairo, so that the pyramids in Cairo line up with Orion's belt, so you've got a timestamp basically, and you know that that's the time when it was made because that's when it all lines up perfectly to within a tiny measurement of a degree. Then if you look at these sets of stars which are triangles, you can map those onto the Earth, and you'll find that basically there are either 3 mountains perfectly aligned with those stars, or in some cases there's 2 highest mountains in that area, in whichever area it is. The 2 highest mountains will be 2 of the points on the triangle of stars, and the third one will be an ancient structure, like it could be a pyramid or a temple or something like that. And that's what this book is basically about, and it shows you that quite clearly. I mean, I have to say, preface this with, I haven't gone through and mathematically checked all of this. I tried to. It's quite a lot of work, and one day I will do. Very interested to hear from people who may have read this book or done research into this, but it very much appeared to me that basically the stars are very much connected to the structure of the Earth, and the ancient people knew that, they understood it, and they built structures to reflect that. And their purpose for doing that, I can only speculate, but at this point it certainly is a very eye-opening lesson for us right now, because it teaches us things that we've forgotten or just don't have a clue about. So I've gone on a very big journey from believing what science told me when I was younger, that we're just random pieces of meat walking around on a rock floating in space by complete chance, to actually everything is designed and created to some extent. Unless people are going to claim that mountains spring up over time as a result of the magnetic field of stars pulling on them or something like that, which maybe, I don't know, but it certainly seems to me that there's a definite order and kind of intelligence behind the geometries and the structure of our solar system at the very least. So that was when I really opened my eyes, when I learned that, and it was shortly after that I started having these wilder experiences, let's say. So rather than paying someone to take you out into a field and meditate and look up at the heavens, maybe you can study what's on the ground first and come to it through your heart, basically through the earth heart, which is what I'm kind of pointing at the whole time. This is our home, so we should probably make friends with our home and treat it a bit better than we do.
Yeah, I think you've still got a couple of other things to show, if you want to just go for those.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I've got these slides here which really just reflect, obviously, I mean, most people have seen this before. If we compare that, the Egyptian Sphinx and pyramids in the background, obviously we could talk about just...
Have you been there, actually?
Yeah, I mean, that in itself is an interesting story. I went there when I was about 13 with my school, and we walked through, didn't actually go into the pyramids, we walked around them, but I remember we went into the Cairo Museum, and basically that was my first paranormal experience that I remember, because we walked past, I remember there was an exhibit that it was, I don't really know if their interpretation of what we were looking at was accurate or not, but it was a very large wooden box covered in gold leaf, very large, and lots of statues around it. I remember as I walked past that towards Tutankhamun's headdress room, basically I felt something enter me very quickly, like a field of energy, but it felt like a person, maybe not a person, I guess you would call it a spirit, basically something of that nature, an energetic entity moved into me and didn't come out, and I was just kind of, what was that? But it was, I had an understanding intuitively. It wasn't like I had no idea what it was. It sort of came with the understanding, oh, that's a piece of spirit. I had no reference point for that. I'd never met anyone talking about anything like that. You know, I watched Ghostbusters when I was a kid, but that's about it pretty much. So I don't really necessarily know what that was, but that was my first paranormal experience, and it definitely opened my eyes to what's possible. So, I mean, I have studied Egypt and the history and the timelines quite a lot now, and I'm firmly of the understanding that Egypt was formed by some of the survivors from Atlantis, after Atlantis was kind of destroyed. And, you know, if you'd have talked to me when I was about 18 and told me I'd be saying this at this age, I would have laughed, because I would never have accepted that Atlantis was real. But having now done quite a lot of research and also into some past lives things, and met lots of people who are also aware of some of their past lives, I'm 90% sure that Atlantis was real. And there's very good sources, very good books for information on that, which still most people are unaware of. So I think basically that my understanding is that the most impressive pyramids in Egypt, actually the oldest, which is the opposite to what the Egyptologists talk about often. They kind of have the idea that they probably the builders started out not being very good at it, and they got better over time, and that's how that works. But my understanding is actually much like the ski jump idea I was talking about. The earlier ones were built with a very deep understanding of sacred geometry and of vibrational science and other spiritual sciences, which allowed them to make them, basically. I mean, it's pretty hard to make a pyramid like that, obviously. And then as time went on, for whatever reason, they lost the understandings. Maybe it was corrupted, maybe they got too addicted to power, I don't know, but they eventually forgot how to build good pyramids, is what it comes down to. And so they ended up making the kind of weaker ones that Egyptologists often claim are the oldest. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this for a very long time. I think there are so many interesting ancient cultures, and most of the most interesting ones don't get talked about, that talking about ancient Egypt feels a little bit of a distraction to me in a way, but I think a lot of the South American and African cultures are very misrepresented and misunderstood.
By example, what type?
Well, an interesting person to study or listen to in about that is Michael Tellinger, South African. I think he's an archaeologist who runs the political party, the Ubuntu Party. Definitely check out some of his videos. He basically started looking at the ancient stoneworks in Africa and in his kind of area, and found very interesting stuff. I mean, there was one area,
circles, millions of circles.
Yeah, and he was showing how it was related to the magnetron, in like an electromagnetic device. Basically, the layout of these structures it formed a similar pattern to what's used in microwaves now. And he was showing how there's lots of stones on the ground you'd find there which were tuned, so if you bang them they make a perfect resonant tone, and he was speculating that they were using these stones to channel energy and vibrations and frequencies, which I can fully accept as being real. So I've also met lots of people, well, a few people who have lived with and met some of the tribes, like the Dogon tribe are quite well known now, for example, they're the people in Africa who basically say that they come from the star system Sirius, and
before we're meant to know about it being a twin system.
Yeah, and you know, and also there's a few tribes like that. There's a very good video with a Mayan shaman or elder who came to Britain, and he went to one of the universities, and some astro specialist from the university was showing him a picture of stars taken from the Hubble telescope. And I think the English guy or European guy basically thought that this jungle dwelling guy was a bit kind of simple, basically, and he was like, they didn't share the same language, so they had a translator, and he showed him the star map or picture, and as the translator was explaining what was going on, the European guy was kind of looking at him like he was a 4-year-old and saying stars, kind of like that, and the Mayan guy just immediately starts blathering in his language, and basically he's saying, oh yeah, that's that star, that's that star, that's that. No, that's it. No, sorry, there's only one star in the whole picture, and he picked it out straight away. There's lots of other objects in the scene, but no other stars. I think I'm right saying that. And he picked it out straight away, and he named it, and he said, oh yeah, that's this in our language, but we can't normally see that from Earth. And the guy's sort of jaw hit the floor, and basically he was like, yeah, we didn't know about it until we had the Hubble telescope. And so basically he's shown that they had knowledge of this space object, let's say, in a way that they couldn't have had just through looking through the naked eye, and they didn't have the Hubble telescope. So there's been a few examples like that you can find on YouTube even, where it really just blows away the idea that these tribes are kind of unevolved, spiritually illiterate beings. They're not at all. They're very, very powerful, very wise often. And I think the European kind of bloodlust that destroyed a lot of them in years gone by is really one of the biggest tragedies that the Earth's ever had, because it forced them to hide their wisdom, and it also forced them to suffer a lot as well. So basically humanity is much worse off for what Europeans did to those cultures. And
yeah, mass genocide, destruction of high knowledge, but by who? Who's really behind that?
My understanding of that is that in essence it's quite simple. It's complicated, but you can view it in a simple way. If you look at the chakra system, the traditional chakra system, the energy centers of the body, which when I first started studying them I didn't really know if they were real or not, but again I looked at it with an open mind, and I'd studied martial arts before. I'd seen people do very unusual things with energy which I would have thought was impossible, but I saw them do it. So I was quite open to studying these things, and in essence what I've been shown is that the upper chakras above the heart, which would be the throat, the third eye, center of the brain, pineal gland, and the crown, they are, let's say, masculine centers, and they're more spirit oriented. So when people say they're a spiritual person, or they pray, or they do these kind of spiritual practices, basically typically they're more focusing in these upper energy centers. if they are more, let's say, body oriented, and they may, they like to dance a lot, jump around, they're more emotional, like traditionally, tribes in Africa and let's say the jungle and other places have been seen to be. They're more in the feminine centers, so they're more in the root and sacral and the solar plexus center. And these are red coloured and the upper ones are blue coloured. And in the middle you've got the heart, which is green, or some people say pink, but it's the balancing point, basically, is the heart. And what seems to have happened is some cultures have gone off and heavily focused into the lower chakra end of things, and some cultures have gone off and focused heavily into the upper chakra side of things. So you've got the European kind of way of being, which is very technology oriented, very mind oriented, very masculine, and not so emotional. And then you've got the more kind of African, South American, other Aboriginal kind of cultures. They don't really develop technology so much now, in our recorded history, but they're very bodily, usually very strong, and they're genetically well adapted to the planet. They're not going to get too damaged going out in the sun and things like that, like us kind of cave dwelling Europeans. And in essence, there's a big kind of conflict on the planet between those groups, and we know that from the fact that they've been fighting for so long, basically. And if you look at the Christian kind of domination of those groups in the past, they would try and justify it by saying, oh, well, these people are from the devil, and God basically is telling us to rid the world of them because they're not living in the way that the Bible or whatever book it is says that they should be living, and they're worshipping XYZ and so on. But yes, there was imbalance in all the cultures, had some degrees of imbalance, and I'm not trying to say that Aztec ritual sacrifice was a good thing, but the point is that every culture has something to offer, and if you destroy a culture, you're going to be losing something important from humanity. And I think your question about who is it that's responsible for targeting these groups, basically from my perspective, it's heartless beings, first of all, who are very anti-emotion. They're very anti-femininity. They're very anti the body, basically. So if you look at, let's say, some of the well-known religions, they often have preached that the body is the work of the devil, and basically even in yoga they teach often that you must transcend your lower energy centers. They even talk about lower chakras. You must remove yourself from your lower chakras. They're the animal version of you. They're the bad part. But in reality, those centers are your survival centers. They're like the core of your ability to exist in a physical body at all. So if you try to cut those out, you die, basically. And that's what we see is when that's why this keeps being played out over and over and over again on planet Earth, is spirit-oriented beings, mind-oriented beings targeting these more body-oriented beings and saying they're bad and trying to kill them. And what's going to happen if they succeed is we're all going to die, basically, because we need their wisdom and their memory and their cultural heritage and their emotionality and their genetics. We need all of those for us to survive as humans at all. So much beyond just not becoming cyborgs, we also need to be, I would say, becoming much more body conscious and much more allowing our minds to connect with our body and to become a complete human being, which in energetic terms basically means all of our chakras are balanced, which I would also point out is something you can't do just by crystals or tones or rituals or anything like that, due to the nature of the chakras, because the lower chakras are emotional. They're not gonna, your emotions don't change just because, completely, just because you come into contact with a crystal or a sound or something like that. You actually have to be emotional, and that's where your vibrational power comes from. So the more emotional you are, the more passionate you are, the more powerful you are, basically. The stronger you're going to be, the quicker your body's going to heal. And interestingly, this really does kind of summarize clearly the situation. Most of us, certainly in Britain and Western cultures, are walking around with a lot of emotional baggage, a lot of fear, anger, resentment, pain, guilt, and a lot of issues like this which need to be healed, but we're not conscious of them because we've chosen not to feel those feelings. We're holding the belief that says anger is bad, anger's dangerous, anger needs to be managed. So therefore we shouldn't have anger, and if we do have anger, we're going to control it and suppress it, and everything will be fine, and we'll walk around pretending we're happy. And then we're driving down the motorway and get angry and stab someone in the throat. You know, that's pretty much the origin of road rage, and probably a lot of murders and probably wars as well, is all of this emotional compression and stifling and denial that builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up, and then it can't be held back anymore. It becomes like a volcano, and it will always find a vent somewhere where it can come out in life. And it might make no sense at all what happens. You know, many murders and things like that are done with no real rational explanation, but if you understand that it's an emotional kind of reaction to denial, then it starts to make a bit more sense. And I would say that some people that I know have said that Tourette's syndrome, for example, is actually an example of that as well, where the person is not allowed to be angry. Their mind is not allowing them to be angry, but they do know that they're allowed to swear. You know, it's like sometimes it's funny to swear, so they'll swear, and then that's accepted, and then, oh, there's Tourette's syndrome, so I can just keep swearing. I'm not meaning to put these people down. I'm just saying maybe we would learn a lot by helping those people to process their emotions, and maybe they might find they can find greater peace through expressing anger in a natural, organic way. And that's something that I've done myself for a long time, and I actually had to spend about 6 months pretty much in bed because I had so much anger built up inside of me, and fear, because I had a near fatal car crash and lots of other things which made me very angry in life, and I'd always suppressed it. Like my grandfather was in World War II, and he was destroyed basically by his own emotional compression and denial. He would never be emotional, and he obviously was very angry and upset by what happened during the war. He lost all his friends, and I saw that and realized, you know, wow, I could feel it, really. I could feel that that's what was happening to him, and I realized, well, I have to learn about this. I have to not do that, basically. I have to evolve and not end up the same way. And so, having had very good resources to help me learn how to do this, I spent about 6 months, as I said, in bed, pretty much just feeling the feeling in my body, and then not controlling it, and then allowing my body to make sounds and movements in whatever needed to come out. And that might be punching the bed or screaming or crying or shaking, whatever I needed to do. And interestingly, all of those things, all of those, let's say, expressions and behaviours, they're the ones which we're told are, you know, only crazy people do those. You'll be going to a mental hospital if you do that. You must be crazy. And if you think about it, it's not crazy to be angry, and it's not crazy to be afraid. So where does all these judgments come from? And that's really the problem. We've heavily judged our real emotions to the point where we've become emotionally crippled, and therefore anybody who kind of doesn't do that, anybody who is emotionally free, it's got to the point where the people that run the societies basically make the key decisions, view those people and say, wow, they're the complete opposite of what they should be. They're crazy. Look at them. They're running around dancing, and you know, that's not right. And that, I mean, if you look at, like, it sounds silly in a way, but like the movie Zulu with Michael Caine, you know, the kind of Zulu war that was talking about, that was kind of how they saw it. You know, it was like they were very kind of stiff upper lip, you know, greasing their moustaches and falling in line and God Save the Queen, all this stuff, and basically just going out and shooting people who were semi-naked, mainly because they were semi-naked. Plus they wanted to steal all the land, obviously. But yeah, so interestingly, that segues into the next topic that I want to talk about, which is a guy called Carroll Quigley, who some people may have heard of, who basically was a historian. He was an Ivy League historian, I think in the 1960s, and to cut a long story short, he was very well respected, and he was a professor, I think, and he somehow got to know certain people in certain secret societies who commissioned him to write a book based on their own private records, their secret records. And the story goes that he wasn't meant to publish that book. It was meant to be just for their own use, and he wrote it over a period of about 2 years. And somehow the book got published, and it came out, I think, by Penguin. And after a few months, it was withdrawn, when obviously the people involved realised he'd done this. But the thing was, it was such a massive book that it was just way beyond what most people were ever going to read. So even though he released a bunch of these group secrets, most people never read it, because it was only apparently about 5% of this massive book had this kind of dynamite information in it. The rest of it was very dry historical documentation of events. So it's taken decades for people to actually really get to grips with what he wrote about. And if you are familiar with James Corbett on YouTube, the Corbett Report, he's covered this in quite some depth. And he did an interview with a guy called Joe Plummer, who wrote his own book based on Carroll Quigley's book. And he basically went through and took out the most important parts of that book and made it easily accessible. And you can read that book for free. It's called, I think it's called Tragedy and Hope 101, if I remember correctly. And in short, what he shows is that these people designed democracy. The whole idea of democracy was basically designed and co-opted by them almost from day one to be nothing more than a theatre act to make sure that the people of the planet basically think that they're having a say in what's being done, when in reality they aren't. And I think most of us know that that's what's happening, but when you actually see it documented and you see the plan and you read about who the people were, how they managed to do it, it really does fill in a lot of the puzzle pieces. And the reason this is connected to what I was just talking about is that apparently, according to Carroll Quigley, the character who started all of this was Cecil Rhodes, who basically the country Rhodesia was named after, and who started the Rhodes Foundation. And you have the famous like Rhodes Scholars, people who get into top universities in England as a result of the money from his kind of, let's say, philanthropy. But what this book tells the story of is, in essence, that he, through their plundering of Africa, basically took the wealth of an entire continent and kind of squirreled it away into his funds and so on. And he was, I mean, it's almost uncalculable the amount of wealth that he had in today's money. But when he died, he left a variety of wills. And the general message in the wills, the ones that were, let's say, more secret, was that his vast wealth was to be used to create a secret society, which he'd already started before he died. And it was, in short, the idea was, he thought that English white men were the best people on planet Earth, and therefore English white men should rule the whole planet. And the idea was that they would use this massive wealth to make that happen. And they kind of did, basically, or they certainly had a go. And so it was run out of a particular, I think it was an Oxford University, or kind of a similar sort of educational establishment there, and they would pick what they considered to be the smartest people of the time to go into the secret society. Had all these different layers. It had like an inner circle, an outer circle, and the outer circle didn't know what the inner circle was doing. And in short, a lot of the world's biggest, wealthiest families, or the wealthiest families, that we still know about today, where some of them have places named after them. They're very well known. Gave billions of dollars into this fund to try to subjugate the rest of the world in the name of kind of Anglo-Saxon dominance. So that definitely is a massive part of our problems, because those people are still running things today. Basically, they're still running the biggest corporations. They're still running governments, and they're still killing millions of people. And they don't really care about. I don't think they even really care about who wins. To be honest, I think all they care about is lots of people die, and their bank balance goes up, pretty much. And I think they see themselves as farmers of planet humanity, in a way, planet Earth, and it's their job to make sure everyone gets corralled into the right fields, and the population doesn't get too high, and they stay at the top of the pyramid. I wouldn't want to go much beyond that, because it would be speculation. I'm not going to start saying they're ruled by reptilians like David Icke or anything like that. I don't know if that's true or not, but according to one of the most respected historians from the last century, this stuff is real. And what can I say? Basically, you can still buy his original books republished now. They weren't available for a long time. Another one that he published, I think it's called The Anglo-American Establishment, which I'm partway through reading. So that's definitely another topic which I recommend people research who are interested in all these things. So again, if you ask who's responsible for all this stuff, basically it's humans. It's just heartless humans, and the kind of root cause of that, as I understand it, is a lack of self-acceptance. So if you don't accept yourself, then you're always going to be trying to get things to bolster your poor self-image, let's say, inside yourself from outside. So you're going to have the biggest house, the biggest car, the most makeup covered trophy wife, the biggest country named after you, whatever it is, you're going to be doing those things, which you wouldn't even think about doing if you were completely accepting yourself. You'd be thinking, if you loved yourself, you had a good internal relationship with yourself, in a sense, you just wouldn't care about those things. You'd just be interested in having fun, feeling good, being creative, doing what you want to do without harming anyone else. But if you hate yourself, basically, then there's nothing stopping you hating other people en masse. And if you don't love yourself, then you definitely aren't going to be loving other people. And that puts you in a position where you are opening the door to you doing things which are highly destructive. And you're going to probably convince yourself that what you're doing is great. Like you're a superhero. You're going to just fabricate a whole bunch of stuff, like a bit like Adolf Hitler with his whole Superman ideology and the idea of the master race and all this stuff. It's all just total fabrication, but it's there to justify what he wants to do, which I don't really want to speculate exactly what he was doing, but the point is that mentality definitely is prevalent in way too many people, in my opinion. And I think the world would be a lot better off if we collectively understood that and kind of helped each other to value ourselves more highly than we've been taught to. It took me a long time to undo the programming that I picked up at school and later, which basically said, I'm in England, so we have our own phraseology for things, but we have the phrase big-headed, or you're full of yourself. And if someone comes along and they're confident, then people would sort of say behind their back, oh, he's full of himself, he's big-headed. But really, I mean, yeah, you can be imbalanced and you can put other people down and try to pretend and posture that you're confident. But if you really are confident, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. It means that you're actually, you're quite happy and empowered in some way, and that's a good thing. But we lost, certainly amongst my friends when we were growing up, we had no real concept of that, and everything got reversed, and that's really what heartlessness is. It's when you take something good and you reverse it and it becomes the opposite of what it should be. So confidence becomes something that's bad and you shouldn't have it, and wealth even is inherently bad to some people. But without wealth, you're quite limited in what you can do. And so we need to be very clear about what is the real version, the good balanced version, and the fake version, much like Vegas versus the ancient monuments. And that's where feelings come in again. So I keep going back to that, but it's possible for us to feel what's loving and what's not loving, and that's the key to all of this. And that's why I'm so alarmed by the AI robotic thing, because they're trying to suggest that AI is going to solve all our problems and give us the answers to all our questions. Even some people that I've seen talking about this who really seem to be quite clued up about a lot of things are actually openly saying, well, we're going to use AI to answer spiritual questions. And I'm kind of thinking, well, no, you aren't. you're gonna get answers which are heartless, which lead you in the wrong direction. So yeah, I think
you've got another picture to show.
Yeah, the next picture, the last one, is this is Las Vegas, so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. Very shiny, very kind of impressive penis phallic kind of symbol there on the right. Lux means light in Latin. So basically it's a big pillar with the word light on it, and with the big pyramid behind it and all these recreations of the mysteries of the world. And they're not going to teach you anything about the mysteries of the world. They're basically just going to suck you in, and with bright flashing lights, and using their decades of research into the brain and into human psychology, they're going to understand, for example, that the human brain is highly focused towards visual processing. So they're going to overload your visual senses with bright lights and sounds and women in underwear and stuff, and basically completely distract you and get you excited and stimulated, and then they're going to take all your money. And I think I like to, another topic that I really like is words and language. I know a lot of people like to study the etymology of our language and find out why we're saying what we're saying, and I think that's a good thing to research. You can learn a lot from that, and that's actually a subject that I am writing a book about. But I just want to say, as an example, you can find a lot of these patterns. There's a lot of very interesting patterns when you look at the words that are used to name places on Earth. So America, for example, AM, I can't even spell America, AMERICA, is an anagram of I am race. So I am race. All right, well, I am is a very kind of well-known spiritual phrase. Basically, it's like the core statement that you exist. Race meaning groups of people racing each other, basically, and fighting, competing, on our planet anyway, the way that it's taught. So I am race. Well, how does America relate to the idea of I am race? Well, that's kind of the whole history of America, is basically lots of people coming along, beating their chest, shouting and declaring that they exist, and then fighting each other based on racial kind of stereotypes and borders. That's hundreds of years worth of history. That's what's been happening there. So I noticed that, and I was thinking, well, that's interesting. And then I started looking at all these different other countries and finding similar patterns. And when you look at Las Vegas, it becomes a little bit esoteric, and you can use your imagination here, but you need to read my book basically to fully understand where I'm coming from with this. But Vegas, VEGAS, backwards, look at it backwards, it's sage with a V on the end, and a V is a symbol of a mirror or a reflection, and reflections are very significant within my way of thinking about things. So sage means wise, and it means basically you're a kind of respected person in community who who knows a lot, and you're able to make good decisions. So what's the opposite of sage? Well, it would be unwise. And they've even in the letter V at the start of Vegas, they're showing you there's a reflection here. So what do we get when we reflect the word? We see sage. So it's basically, I don't know whether this was done deliberately or not, but I know these groups do like to play around with words and encodings and things. It's interesting. I don't know if it's deliberate or not, but however you look at it, it basically is encoded in there. It's like the name of it is showing you this is the opposite of intelligent. This is the opposite of wise. That's what Vegas is. And the fact that they've got Luxor there just blatantly as well, bringing light into it as well. As many people have pointed out, these groups definitely do like to throw things in our faces, hidden in plain sight. And I think, I don't know if they always do it deliberately even, but I think there's definitely an element of this where they're kind of challenging you to, it's like they think they're much smarter than you, so therefore they're leaving you a little clue, a little breadcrumb, to try and trigger your mind to think like they think, because they think better than everyone else. So if they can show you, a little bit of how they think, then you're going to be, they've helped you, they've done a good deed while they're robbing you blind. Maybe that's me being a bit cynical, but I've seen this a lot, and I think there's definitely an element of that to it. So yeah, I mean, we could talk for days and days and days, or I could talk anyway about America and the government. And
well, how do you want to close then?
I think I'd like to just remind people that you are loved, and you have the power that you need inside of you if you actually take the time to stop looking in your cell phone, stop watching TV, go out into nature, meditate, feel the planet, open your mind, and actually feel more. If you're willing to do all those things, clean up your diet, remove the junk from your diet, stop buying the corporate products, basically live a natural life. If you're able to do all those things, which everyone probably can, you're going to solve a lot of your problems. A lot of the problems that you think that you have, they're not real problems. They're not even relevant to you. You won't be worried about those once you've solved some of your other problems, which tend to stem from polluted body, brain, and mind as a result of countless toxins, countless impurities introduced into our environment from the water pollution, the air pollution, food pollution, GMOs, all these different things. Really, my really strong suggestion is to remember who you are, find what you personally need to be empowered, and don't give up, and just understand that you're a divine being. You're a divine creative spirit, basically, who's an extension of the energy that created the whole universe, and the energy that created the universe didn't do it so that you could sit in an office throwing bits of paper around and basically just trying to make digits in a computer get bigger so that you can have more money. We come from, if you believe in science, then we come from the Big Bang, and that wasn't the Big Bank. So if you can sort of remember that in your daily life and take little steps here and there to become a bit more free and less reliant on these controlling pyramid systems and more in your heart, then you're going to enjoy life more, and I'll see you there, basically. You're welcome to come to my website, which is eureka.org, ureka.org. It's a social network which I created, and I'm constantly evolving it, and it's basically intended to support free will, healing, balancing and evolving, and try to control people or manipulate in no way people's thoughts, as far as is possible within the legal frameworks we have to operate within. Obviously we're not going to allow obviously criminal things to happen on there, but basically it's there to try and help us heal and not sell you things. There's no adverts on there, and yeah, just come along and join in, say hello. And on top of that, I might be adding in at some point soon something like Steam It, so you'll actually be able to be paid on there if you want to for posting. So hopefully together we can improve and make life more enjoyable. I think that's where I'd like to leave it.
Well, thank you, Ura Soul.
Thank you, Miles.